Welcome back, fam. I'm Waiyapaints, and today I'm painting the largest statue ever for my channel. It's Onslaught from Creative Geek. Now, before I begin, a bit of a disclaimer. I had a pretty big catastrophe that was completely my fault. You'll see what happens, and it came down to my choice to print this in resin and at full scale. With that forewarning out of the way, I'm going to head on over to the paint desk. Let's get started. My first step in the base is to add some extra texture to the earthy bits with a healthy stipple of sterling mud. Doing this will add a good deal of roughness to the model, which will be picked up on later layers, and adds a bit of depth without much effort. Just know you might be sacrificing a brush to do this. So remember, when using texture paints, to use an old disposable brush you don't care about. It only takes a few grains getting deep in your bristles to ruin a brush. As the next largest feature, I wanted to block in the color on the pillars. For that, I used Carapace Gray. Honestly, this was just a half step lighter than the black primer, and I could have skipped it, but it ended up normalizing the gap filler areas fairly well, so I guess it wasn't a complete waste. Next, I use Uniform Gray as the mid-tone. I find when I'm painting, I lean into letting the model's texture do some of the heavy lifting. A heavy dry brush here does just that, giving me a dramatic transition from black to the gray effortlessly. Never underestimate the power of dry brushing. Finally, I used one of the oldest paints in my drawer, Alien Skin. This time, my dry brush was light and directed. Thankfully again, the texture dictates that application. Normally, I would keep these strokes going in one direction to maintain a light source, but I wanted an unnatural lighting to let all this wonderful texture shine. Jumping back to the earth, I used Bootstrap and a heavy stipple. Whenever I do this, once I notice my brush is getting kinda dry, I switch from a stipple to a scrub to start blending in that previous stipple into the other layers. And for my money, these two steps gives a nice random pattern of tone variations. Last, earth was used as a final dry brush to finish off the look. These last bits of highlight are what's really gonna make or break this base. I find it helpful to try to not overthink it. If I feel the spot needs some love, I give it a little dab. Just a little bit. It's always easier to add a little more than to try to take back love. Now is the time for Menoth White to base all these skulls. This is the start of my go-to recipe for bones and skulls. It begins with 2 coats of this base. This is a great warm cream color that can be heavily shaded for rotting bones or brightened for bleached bones. One thing I do for skulls though is that I don't paint the orbital sockets. I find whenever I do, I tend to heavily shade these areas to get them to almost black anyways, so I could just skip all that effort and leave them blank. Besides, this gives the skull a very striking look from a distance. Next, each got a wash with sepia. I wanted to have a medium tone for this bone, so I settled for a single wash shade before moving on to the next step. The key here is to make sure each skull is evenly coated to the same tint without too much pooling. But just so you know, any small amounts of pooling can be corrected in the next step, which is when I come back in with the Menoth as a dry brush. This allows me to pick out all the details on the front of the skull and add a gradual highlight to the crown. Once I get a nice solid cream tone on each, I'm calling them done. Now for some of the add-on details. These are 2 eye beans that stick out from either side of the base. I've seen these on construction sites, and these are typically a brownish red color, so that's what I went with. I mixed up some scarlet and leather brown. Once I found a tone I like, I gave them each a coat and then a heavy earth shade and then called them done. This is a good second to stop and thank my subscribers over at Patreon. Even though I got this STL from their store on CG Trader, be sure to check out Creative Geek's Patreon as well. You'll find links to both in the description below. Moving on to my spray booth, I started laying down some metallics using Rust-Oleum metallic finish over the main body parts. Now, I want to give this product praise, but I had some issues that gave me headaches, mainly with how this reacted to my inks and varnish, but I'll get into that later. For now, everything got a coat of silver. If you use this product, be sure to pay attention to ensure thin coats. I found it very easy to overdo it and get a surface drip. Next I sprayed purple. Using the ink here lets the metallic act as a shiny undercoat. The big issue here is getting an even coat. With the reflectiveness of metallics, it's hard to see the ink layer that I was laying down. So I caught myself going back over certain parts mainly because of a bad lighting angle. Because of this, it's a good idea to hold the part under different light sources to get a better idea how the paint is sitting on the model. Next up, red ink. Just like with the purple, the idea is to filter this ink on top and have the metallic shine through. Not only did I use this red for the main body, but I also used it on the shield. This was a bit of wasted effort as the metallic also did not play well with the masking tape as it completely dulled the surface when I removed it. Finally, before we leave the booth, I want to get some gold on the Xavier school medal. Using the airbrush here will save me a whole lot of hassle when trying to get this color evenly in all the recesses. Sticking with the metal, I shaded it with earth shade. This is really for the recesses, but I didn't concern myself with really staying in the lines too much, as it would just add to the overall weathering. More important was to ensure a deep all over shade. Once this was dry, going back over the raised areas with a gold dry brush, shined up and finished the school medal. Next, the ground and skulls got the same treatment as the regular base got. A heavy stipple of sterling mud, followed by bootstrap and leather brown for the ground. Menoth white, a sepia wash followed by Menoth dry brush for the skulls. With the base nearly done, I jumped all the way up to the top and started on his face. I used my go-to skin mix of Bad Bruise and Midland Flesh. This starts off as a 50-50 mix for the base coat, and as I add progressive layers, I use less and less Bad Bruise. I'm putting these layers on quite rough, as this is a psychic energy form, so I wanted it to have a bit of an odd texture to the skin. This might look a little janky, but once the helmet goes on, it looks sick. For his eyes, I wanted a glowy look without going full OSL effect, so I went with Frostbite for the base, and then I highlighted the center with pure white. With an eyeball on the finish line, I used Bad Bruise to paint the trim on his helmet and his finger and hand armor. Now I came with problem 2 with this metallic. I'd used a varnish to protect the super delicate ink layer, but it had reacted with the metallic in a weird way where the varnish was not sticking to the metallics and would get scratched off with the ink if you even looked at it the wrong way. So I rebased the shield, this time using shining silver. Then I slapped down magic blue and bloody red for the details. All that was left was final assembly, and that is when tragedy struck. You see, I didn't print the full base. This is what the model plus full base is supposed to look like, and I printed to here. And at this point, I had already used over 3 kilograms of resin, so I was looking for alternatives. In hindsight, this would have been so much smoother on an FDM printer. It would have been lighter, stronger, and cheaper. Or at least if I even would have reduced the scale by like 50%. But because I'm stubborn, I pushed forward with printing this at full size in resin, but I just didn't have another 3 bottles to finish the base. So I went ahead and made a simple base and a plinth that honestly I was pretty proud of. Until about 30 seconds after I finished final assembly, when I heard a crash and I found this. My friends, that hurt. But thankfully this wasn't a commission, so a bit of glue and I was back in business. Just a few minor scuffs here and there. Unfortunately, due to this size and weight, I'll have to forego the usual 360 shop. I learned quite a few things on this build, including how quick resin costs can spiral out of control. Hopefully, these lessons will lead me to better results in the future. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you would like to see more from Creative Geek, check out the included links. And as always, thank you for watching. Keep creating and try your best to enjoy the process.